The vast chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with anticipation. Representatives from over 50 species filled the seats around the circular table, each occupying their space with a sense of grandeur and authority. Among them, a new presence stood out, Captain Lydia Reyes, her uniform as pristine as her resolve. She was human, young, and unyielding, her eyes scanning the room, noting every face that turned to her. The silence in the room was deafening, 1,000 voices held in check by the weight of the moment. Lydia stood at the center of the room, before a massive holographic display. The Galactic Council had long debated humanity's place in the galaxy, and today's session would decide if the United Human Federation would continue to be treated as a lesser species, or whether they would finally earn the recognition they deserved. Across from her, High Chancellor Orlosk, the leader of the Synthor race, watched with thinly veiled contempt. The Synthor had always regarded humanity as unpredictable, too volatile to be trusted. Their sleek, metallic form loomed like a shadow in the corner, their cold eyes fixed on Lydia. "Captain Reyes, we've heard your proposal." Orlosk's voice was calm, almost detached. "And yet you insist on ignoring the reality of the situation. The Council was established to ensure peace, not to let an untested species like humanity tear it apart." Lydia's eyes narrowed. Her pulse remained steady, betraying none of the nerves that might have shaken a lesser person. "Peace has been maintained at the cost of human dignity," she replied, her voice steady, cutting through the tension. "Humanity has earned its place. We won't beg for scraps at the table anymore." A ripple of discomfort swept across the room. Several species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Clothians, towering and muscular, growled low among themselves, exchanging glances. They were known for their aggressive nature, but they had long maintained a fragile truce with the humans. The idea of humanity gaining too much influence, however, unsettled them. Orlosk tilted his head, the sharp angles of his face giving him an almost reptilian quality. "You misunderstand, Captain. The galaxy is not a place for a species to rise simply by force. It is about balance. You, as young as you are, must learn to respect the rules that have kept the peace for millennia." Lydia clenched her fists, willing herself not to react too impulsively. She had prepared for this, but hearing it aloud stoked a fire inside her that she had learned to control. "With all due respect, Chancellor, the balance you speak of has always been one-sided. Humanity's contributions to the galactic community have been overlooked. We've been expected to play by your rules that are designed to keep us small." The room was now on edge, the council members exchanging murmurs. The neutral species, the Xanthari, leaned forward, their ethereal forms glowing slightly as they listened. They had always been diplomatic, but Lydia could see the wariness in their eyes. They, too, had been hesitant about the rise of humanity. Lydia continued, her words becoming sharper with each sentence. "Our technology has surpassed your expectations. Our economy is now the strongest in the galaxy. And yet, here we are, still asked to bow before those who believe they are our superiors. This is not a request anymore. This is a demand." A tense silence followed. Orlosk leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, his voice lowering. "Do you believe your demand will go unchallenged?" His tone was laced with menace, but Lydia did not flinch. "You can challenge it all you want," Lydia said coolly. "But the truth is, the galaxy is changing. The old order is crumbling. Humanity is no longer the fledgling species you once underestimated. And if you're not careful, you might find yourself swept away by the current." Orlosk's lips curled into a thin smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Bold words. But words will not win this council's favor. We have seen what happens when species grow too bold, war follows." Lydia straightened her back, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here to make threats. I'm here to present a new vision. A vision where humanity stands on equal ground with the rest of the galaxy. If that's something you can't accept, then so be it. But we will no longer be the pawn in your games." The weight of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The Synthor, the Clothians, and the other races exchanged tense looks. They were accustomed to maintaining control, to being the ones who set the terms. Now, for the first time, they faced a species unwilling to be controlled. A voice cut through the tension, a calm, deep voice from the Xanthari representative, Maris. "Captain Reyes," Maris said, his glowing figure rising slightly from his seat. "While I understand your position, you must recognize the delicate balance that has kept us all safe. If humanity's rise disrupts that balance, it could lead to... Disruption is inevitable." Lydia interrupted, her eyes fixed on the glowing form of the Xanthari. "The galaxy is changing, and if we don't evolve with it, we will be left behind. The question is not whether disruption will occur, it's how we choose to navigate it." Orlosk's eyes flashed with a mix of irritation and calculation. He stood slowly, his voice dripping with contempt. "The question, Captain Reyes, is whether you will prove that humanity is worthy of this change. The Council will not simply hand you power because you demand it." Lydia locked eyes with the High Chancellor. "No, Chancellor," she said firmly. "You won't hand it to us. We will take it." The room fell into an eerie silence as the weight of her declaration settled over the Council members. Some were stunned, others were angry, but none could deny the defiance in her words. For the first time in galactic history, a human had openly declared that they would not ask for permission to rise. Orlosk's nostrils flared as he took a step back, clearly displeased, but not entirely surprised. He had always known that humanity was different. This moment, however, marked a shift. The age-old dynamics were about to be tested, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The session adjourned shortly after Lydia's statement, but the tension in the air was palpable. As the delegates filed out of the room, Lydia's eyes stayed focused ahead, her mind already racing. This was only the beginning. The real battle had just started. The tension in the Galactic Council chamber had barely settled when the next session convened. Lydia's words from the previous meeting still lingered in the air, like the faint hum of an impending storm. She sat at the human delegations table, eyes scanning the room as the council members took their seats. The murmurs of the representatives filled the space, but Lydia could see the divide. Some were cautiously optimistic, others barely hiding their disdain. High Chancellor Orlosk was already seated, his cold eyes locked on Lydia as if daring her to make another move. The Synthar were notorious for their patience, but Lydia knew that their tolerance was wearing thin. The Clothians, massive and heavily armed, looked uneasy, their growls barely audible but unmistakable. Their leader, General Creel, glared at the human delegation with a hostility that was hard to ignore. The council convened under the looming shadows of the high vaulted ceiling, a neutral space meant for diplomacy. But today, diplomacy felt like a distant memory. The air was thick with distrust. Lydia could feel it in her bones. "Let us begin," the council speaker, a neutral Xanthari named Lamar, called out, his calm voice contrasting the atmosphere around him. "We will now hear the next proposal from the United Human Federation." Lydia stood, her gaze steady as she addressed the council. The quiet that followed felt like an eternity. "Thank you, Speaker," she began, her voice calm, but resolute. "In the last meeting, I outlined humanity's position. We will no longer beg for approval from any race. We are here to claim our place as equals." Orlosk shifted in his seat, and the room fell silent. The Synthar representative's sharp, calculated gaze was now aimed directly at Lydia. "I'm afraid you misunderstood, Captain Reyes," Orlosk said smoothly. "Equality is not a right, it is a responsibility. And you seem to forget the responsibility that comes with power." His voice was laced with authority, a reminder of his long-standing control over the council. Lydia's expression remained unreadable. "I don't forget the responsibility, Chancellor. What I am refusing to accept is the idea that humanity must forever bow to your rules simply to exist. We will rise, with or without your consent." A soft chuckle rippled through the Clothian delegation. General Creel stood up, his massive frame towering over the table. "Rise? You talk of rising, human, but what you fail to understand is that power does not simply rise from words. It rises from strength. Your species has yet to prove that you can wield your newfound power responsibly." Lydia met his gaze head-on, unfazed. "And you believe your strength is a reason to dominate?" The galaxy has seen enough of that. Humanity is not here to be subjugated, General. We have learned from the past, and we will not make the same mistakes. The tension in the room escalated. The Clothian snarled softly, while Orlosk's face remained cold, unreadable. But Lydia could sense the growing unrest. Her words had struck a nerve. What you failed to understand, Lydia continued, is that the galaxy is no longer as it once was. Your strength, your age, your history, these are no longer enough to dictate the future. Humanity is not here to ask for permission. We are here to claim what is rightfully ours. There was a sharp intake of breath from some of the representatives. The Sinther exchanged a quiet word among themselves, and the Clothians growled louder, their frustration evident. The room felt like a powder keg, just waiting for the spark. I will not sit here and listen to these unfounded claims, Orlosk snapped, his voice rising with controlled anger. You have no idea what you are challenging. This council is the backbone of the galaxy's peace. You cannot simply bulldoze over it because you have grown bold with your technology. You will answer for this arrogance. The words hung in the air like a challenge, one that could not go unanswered. Lydia's mind raced, calculating her next move. She knew that the human's position would not be easily accepted, but the alternative, retreating back into submission, was no longer an option. The only thing I'm challenging, Chancellor, Lydia replied evenly, her voice unwavering, is the assumption that humanity is weak, or that we can be dictated to. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm demanding respect. The Sinther representatives exchanged uneasy glances, and the Clothians bristled, their hands moving instinctively to the weapons at their sides. The council was on the verge of erupting into chaos. Lydia could feel the shift in the room, the subtle but undeniable shift toward conflict. Enough! Lamar, the Zenthari speaker, intervened. His voice, though calm, rang with authority. This is not the time for threats, but for negotiation. The future of this council, and perhaps of all races, depends on this moment. If we cannot find a way to work together, then what was the purpose of forming this body? Lydia took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room. The neutrals, the Zenthari included, looked torn. They had always valued diplomacy, but there were limits to their tolerance. The tension between the established races and humanity was becoming unbearable. We are not here to destroy the balance, Speaker, Lydia said, her voice still calm but firm. We are here to challenge the outdated notions that have kept us from rising. Humanity has a voice in this galaxy, and we will not be silenced. Orlosk's eyes narrowed. Then let us see if you can back up your words with actions, he said quietly, but there was a threat in his tone. Perhaps it is time for you to prove that humanity is capable of standing on its own, without the crutches of your so-called diplomacy. Lydia straightened her posture, knowing full well that the path she was walking now was fraught with danger. We'll prove it, she replied, her voice steady. Not with words, but with actions. And when that time comes, you will remember this moment. The council was plunged into silence once again, but this time, it felt different. The debate had ceased to be a matter of words. It was no longer about negotiation. It was about survival. The old guard of the galaxy, the Sinther, the Clothians, the Zenthari, had never faced a species like humanity. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they would have to contend with it. Orlosk stood abruptly, his cold stare never leaving Lydia. We shall see, he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet fury. The meeting adjourned without resolution, but the damage had already been done. The first clash had occurred, and the stakes had been set. The galaxy was no longer divided simply by race, but by a challenge for dominance. And humanity, for the first time, had made it clear that they would not be ignored. As the council members left the room, Lydia remained standing, her eyes fixed on the massive windows overlooking the stars. She had made her move, and now the galaxy would watch as humanity made its stand. The fallout from the council meeting spread like wildfire across the galaxy. News feeds flooded with updates, analysis, and fiery debates over Lydia's bold declaration. The once stable peace was now a fragile illusion, and humanity's refusal to bow before the established powers had sent ripples through the most influential systems. The age-old order was being questioned. Old alliances began to shift, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt like it was on the brink of something far greater, and far more dangerous. Lydia sat in her private quarters aboard the human flagship, Ares, staring out at the vastness of space. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a stark contrast to the chaotic buzz of the media channels flooding her inbox. She hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours, but her mind refused to rest. Every decision from here on out would determine whether humanity would stand as equals, or be crushed under the weight of galactic resentment. A chime interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the hollow display on the table. It was Admiral Jace Turner, her second in command, his face flickering in the projection. His brow was furrowed, and his expression was tense. "Captain, we need to talk. Now." Lydia's stomach tightened. "What's happened?" Turner's face flickered with static before he spoke again. "The Clothians are mobilizing. They've been rattling their sabers, preparing for some sort of retaliation. They've called for reinforcements from their home system." Lydia stood up, her pulse quickening. "Are they preparing for war?" "Not yet, but it's clear they're expecting something. They've even started issuing threats to neutral systems, warning them not to support the humans in the upcoming vote." Lydia rubbed her temples, trying to think through the implications. The Clothians were a volatile force, their strength unmatched in hand-to-hand combat and tactics. If they entered the fray, there would be little hope for a peaceful resolution. "What about the Center?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm building in her chest. "Do we have any intel on their position?" Turner's expression darkened. "The Center are playing it cool for now, but there are whispers that they're aligning with the Clothians. Orlos doesn't want to make a move yet, but it's clear he's been quietly rallying support from the other council members." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "So, it's all coming to a head. The vote is less than a week away, and if we don't make a stand soon, they'll have the upper hand." "I agree," Turner said, his tone unwavering. "We need to secure the support of the neutral systems. If we don't get them on our side, we'll be outnumbered." Lydia paused for a moment, considering their options. She knew that diplomacy had its limits, especially when it came to a body as fractured as the Galactic Council. She had hoped the vote would be enough to shift the balance in humanity's favor, but the recent developments had made it clear, if humanity didn't act now, they would lose everything. "Set up a meeting with the Zentari," Lydia ordered, her voice firm. "We need their support if we're going to stand a chance." Turner hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Understood, Captain." Lydia disconnected the call and leaned against the table, her thoughts racing. The galaxy was a powder keg, and humanity had just struck the match. She had been prepared for resistance, but the reality of it felt different. Every faction, every species, now had a stake in the outcome. Humanity was no longer a bystander, they were a player. But whether that would be enough to tip the scales in their favor was another question entirely. As she stepped out of her quarters and made her way to the war room, the weight of the situation settled in. The crew of the Ares had already mobilized, preparing for whatever came next. Yet even in the face of the unknown, Lydia couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had stood up for itself. They had made their stance clear, and now the galaxy would have to reckon with it. The war room was dimly lit, the flickering light from multiple holodisplays illuminating the tense faces of the crew. Turner was already there, alongside several other senior officers, all of them focused on the unfolding situation. "Captain," Turner greeted her as she entered. "We've set up the diplomatic channel with the Zentari. Their response is pending, but I've advised them of the urgency." Lydia nodded, taking her place at the head of the table. "Good. But we need more than just their response. We need their backing. The Clothians and Synther will try to push us into a corner, and we cannot afford to be cornered. If we want peace, we must show them we are willing to fight for it." "Understood," Turner replied. "But what if the vote doesn't go our way? What if we lose their support, and the other species rally against us?" Lydia's gaze hardened. "Then we'll make them regret underestimating humanity." The door to the war room opened, and Lieutenant Ilara, one of Lydia's most trusted officers, stepped inside, her face grave. "Captain, we've intercepted a transmission. It's from the Clothian fleet. There are rumors of them preparing for a military strike if humanity doesn't back down." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. This was no longer just a political struggle. The threat of violence was no longer a possibility, it was a reality. "I want all systems on alert," Lydia said, her voice low but commanding. "Prepare the fleet for defensive action. We are not going to back down, and neither will we let them dictate our future." The officers nodded, their faces resolute. The crew of the Ares had seen conflict before, but this was different. This was no longer about diplomacy, it was about survival. As the crew mobilized, Lydia's mind returned to the heart of the problem, the vote. If they lost it, humanity would have no choice but to face the consequences. If they won, the galaxy would be forced to accept humanity's rise. But the cost of that victory was rising with every passing minute. The Synthers' quiet support of the Clothians, the rising unrest among the neutral species, everything was pointing to one thing: the galaxy was on the brink of war. And humanity, for better or worse, was about to lead the charge. Lydia gazed out the viewport, the stars stretching endlessly before her. There was no turning back now. The storm was coming, and all she could do was brace for impact. The meeting had been called. The final vote to decide humanity's future in the Galactic Council would happen in just hours. Tensions were at an all-time high, and the stakes were crystal clear. The Ares was anchored in orbit around the neutral moon, its crew poised for action. Across the galaxy, the Clothians were massing their forces, their fleet growing larger by the minute. The Synther, though silent, were just as ominous, their quiet maneuvering signaling their intent. Inside the war room, Lydia stood before the massive holographic display, her hands clasped behind her back as she reviewed the intelligence reports streaming in. Every race, every system, was watching this vote, but none more than the humans. The outcome would either solidify their place as equals or mark the beginning of an irreversible descent into conflict. Turner entered, his expression tense. "Captain, the Xanthari have agreed to meet with us. They're sending a delegation to our coordinates. It's our last shot at securing their vote." Lydia turned to face him, her eyes steely. "Is it enough?" "I don't know," Turner admitted, his voice tight. "The Xanthari have always been neutral, but their reluctance to take a side may be our downfall. The Clothians are pressuring them hard." Lydia's gaze hardened. "Then we have to convince them. No more games. No more diplomacy. We show them that we are ready to stand alone if necessary." "Understood," Turner said, his tone firm. "I'll make sure the delegation is prepared. But we can't afford another delay, Captain." Lydia nodded sharply. "Get them ready. We don't have much time." The Ares' corridors were alive with activity. Officers and crew members worked furiously to prepare for whatever was to come, whether it be a vote or a battle. As the ship's commander, Lydia moved with precision through the chaos, her mind always focused on the task at hand. She knew that the next few hours would define the course of human history. The Xanthari delegation arrived shortly after, their ship landing on the Ares with graceful efficiency. As the sleek, translucent figures entered the conference room, Lydia immediately recognized their leader, Maris. His ethereal form radiated a quiet strength, his skin shimmering faintly like liquid light. He was older than most Xanthari, his experience written in the calmness of his eyes. "Captain Reyes," Maris greeted, his voice soft but full of weight. "You have been bold in your demands, but the galaxy is not so easily swayed." Lydia stood, extending a hand, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not here to play by your rules, Maris. I'm here to change them. Humanity's place in the galaxy is no longer for you or anyone else to decide. We will not be silenced." Maris studied her for a moment, his pale blue eyes assessing her. He stepped closer, his presence gentle yet commanding. "You underestimate the forces at play, Captain. The Clothians are not a power to be taken lightly. And the Synther, though quiet, are a force in their own right. They will not sit idle as you push for change." Lydia's jaw tightened. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking you to stand with us. Humanity has earned its place, and we will not be pushed into the shadows any longer. There was a long silence. The tension between them was palpable. The Zenthari were peaceful by nature, often refusing to involve themselves in galactic politics. But this time, Lydia knew they would have to make a choice: remain neutral and watch the galaxy descend into war, or stand with humanity and face the consequences of that decision. Maris finally spoke, his voice steady. The Zenthari do not choose sides lightly. But we have watched humanity rise, seen the strength in your resolve. You may be young in this galaxy, Captain, but you carry with you the fire of a species that refuses to be held down. I will not stand against that. Lydia exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her. So you will support us? We will not stand in your way, Maris said, but we cannot make the decision for others. You must convince the Council. You must show them that your strength lies not only in your resolve but in your ability to lead, to bring unity where there was division. Lydia nodded. Thank you, Maris. You've given us a chance. Now we must finish this. The war room was silent as Lydia returned to her officers, the Zentharis backing now in hand. The next few hours were critical. The vote was approaching, and with the Zenthari's support, humanity now had a fighting chance. But Lydia knew that this wasn't over yet. The Clothians and Sinther would not back down easily. Admiral Turner, get our fleet ready, Lydia ordered. We may not need to fire a shot, but we will be ready if it comes to that. Turner's eyes locked onto hers. Yes, Captain. We'll be ready. Lydia turned to the rest of her senior officers. This is it. The next few hours will determine everything. We've made our stand. Now we must make them see the strength of humanity, the unity that we have fought so hard for. One of her officers, Lieutenant Alara, stepped forward, her voice tense. Captain, the Clothians have begun moving their fleet. They've taken up a position near the neutral zone. They are preparing for something. Lydia's heart raced. Is it an attack? We're not sure yet, but they're too close for comfort. We're ready, Lydia said firmly. Get our fleet into position. We won't let them push us back. As the minutes ticked down, Lydia felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The vote would soon begin, and humanity's future hung in the balance. But as the Ares' crew moved into position, she knew one thing was certain: they were no longer the underdog. They had made their stand, and now the galaxy would have to reckon with it. Lydia stood tall as she watched the stars outside the viewport. The battle was only just beginning. The fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, and she wasn't about to let humanity go down without a fight. The Ares and its fleet moved into formation, ready for whatever came next. The final vote was approaching, and Lydia was ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. The final vote had come, and the Galactic Council was teetering on the edge of a precipice. The chamber was filled with an uncomfortable silence, the air heavy with the weight of decisions yet to be made. Every representative from the various species of the galaxy was present, but their minds were elsewhere, divided, uneasy, and uncertain. Humanity had made its move, and now, they would see if it would pay off. Lydia stood at the head of the human delegation, her eyes locked on the massive holographic display in the center of the room. The vote was about to begin, but the council was not so easily swayed. The Clothians, despite the Zenthari's support, were still as obstinate as ever. Orlosk, the High Chancellor of the Sinther, was already standing, a cold look in his eyes, as if he had already resigned himself to the outcome he expected. But Lydia knew differently. This was the moment she had been fighting for: no more compromises, no more appeasements. Humanity would either stand or fall on the strength of its resolve. Captain Reyes, Lamar, the Zenthari speaker called, his voice steady but lined with a hint of concern. The time has come. You will have the floor for the final words before the vote. Lydia's heart raced, but she kept her face impassive. She knew what she had to do. She had prepared for this, rehearsed it countless times in her mind. She had made her case to the council already, But now was the moment to prove that humanity was not just some fledgling race but a force to be reckoned with. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the floor, and looked out over the vast assembly. For a moment, the world felt like it had shrunk to this single room, the future of humanity, the future of the galaxy, all hanging in the balance. It was her turn to speak. "Council members," Lydia began, her voice calm but unwavering. "You've heard our case. You've heard our demands, our vision for the future of this galaxy. Humanity's place in it is not to be earned through appeasement or negotiation. It is to be earned through action, through strength, through unity." A low murmur rippled through the room, but Lydia did not flinch. She continued, her eyes locking with Orlosk's as he sat there, stoic and silent. "We stand here today not to beg for a seat at the table, but to demand one. We've earned it. We've earned it through our blood, our sweat, and our sacrifices. And we will not back down." Her words were sharp, calculated, each one deliberately chosen to send a message. The galaxy was watching. This vote wasn't just about humanity's place in the galaxy. It was about the balance of power itself. And Lydia knew that the Old Guard, the Clothians, the Sinther, the Zenthari, they all saw humanity's rise as a threat to their established order. But that's exactly what it was. Humanity was a threat. A threat to complacency. A threat to the status quo. "Do not mistake us for the underdog," Lydia continued, her voice gaining strength. "We are not asking for your permission. We are here to claim what is rightfully ours. You've tried to suppress us, to hold us down, to keep us in the shadows. But no longer. No longer will humanity be ignored, overlooked, or dismissed. We will lead this galaxy, not as conquerors, but as equals." Orlosk's cold gaze never wavered, but Lydia could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She had said what needed to be said. There was no turning back now. Today, the galaxy stands at a crossroads. You will either accept humanity's rightful place among you, or you will face the consequences of your refusal. Lydia finished, her voice steady, commanding. "Choose wisely." The room fell silent. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Lydia felt the full power of the moment. This was not just a vote, it was a declaration. The galaxy would either bend to the will of the old powers or embrace the change humanity was bringing. Umar looked toward the council, his calm expression unreadable. "The vote will now begin," he announced. "Each representative will cast their vote for or against the proposal put forth by Captain Lydia Reyes and the United Human Federation." Lydia took her seat, her fingers clenching around the armrests, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done all she could. The rest was in the hands of the council members. One by one, they cast their votes, some with hesitation, others with conviction. Lydia's eyes flicked between the delegates, reading their faces, trying to gauge where the vote was headed. The Clothians were solidly against her, as expected. Orlosk's gaze was cold, calculating, but Lydia didn't need to read his expression to know how he would vote. The Sinther were a lost cause. Then came the Zenthari. Maris stood slowly, his ethereal form glowing faintly as he stepped forward to cast his vote. The room held its breath. "For," Maris said, his voice clear and unwavering. The neutral races were divided, but the Zenthari had chosen. They had sided with humanity. A ripple of surprise spread through the room, and Lydia allowed herself a small breath of relief. It wasn't over yet, but it was a victory nonetheless. The final votes came in, one by one, until the last delegate stood to cast their ballot. The council was divided, but Lydia had done it. The vote passed. The room erupted in shock. Some delegates stood in disbelief, while others exchanged hushed whispers. But Lydia stood firm, her heart still racing, but her face impassive. She had won. Humanity had won. Umar's voice cut through the noise. "The vote has passed. Humanity is now recognized as an equal member of the Galactic Council." For a moment, Lydia couldn't believe it. She had fought for this, for her people, for her species, and it had paid off. The room seemed to spin as the weight of the victory settled in. But there was no time for celebration. Lydia knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would not accept humanity's rise without resistance, but they had made their stand. And as the newly elected council members congratulated her, Lydia's thoughts were already on the future, on the battles to come, on the alliances to form, on the future of a galaxy that would never be the same again. She turned to her officers, a small, determined smile on her face. "We've won this battle," she said, her voice steady. "But the war is just beginning." The future was uncertain, but humanity had made its mark. The dawn of a new era had begun. And Lydia Reyes, captain of the United Human Federation, was ready to lead her people into it.